Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for yet another edition of your program, Navigating the Nuances of AI Implementation in Nations, here on Amoge Radio Communications. I remain your host, Tolu Modara, saying thank you for staying tuned and welcome. This is going to be an episode dedicated to maximizing the blue collar opportunities in artificial intelligence, the blue collar employment opportunities in artificial intelligence. Again, I remain your host, Tolu Modara, warmly welcoming you to yet another episode of Navigating Nuances of AI Implementation in Nations here on Amoge Radio Communications. And this is the episode for today, Monday, August 24, 2026. So, last week we looked at the impact of artificial intelligence, especially on children, right? We looked at what it was doing to their intellectual capability development. We looked at studies in nations like Norway that compared children who relied heavily on artificial intelligence and technological tools, over a certain period, did a longitudinal study to look at the impact of such technology dependence on their critical thinking abilities, amongst other skills like reading and writing, with those of children who were not as dependent, or with when children were not as dependent. And we also looked at things like, the impact of artificial intelligence on their privacy and so on and so forth. A whole lot is going on. And like we always say, we encourage you to please subscribe to our YouTube page, Amoge Radio Communications, and catch up with last week's episode if you missed it, especially as a policymaker, either in the field of education or innovation management, or even governance in your nation. There is a whole lot that we need to do, and we all have to come together as parents, as educators, as caregivers, as policymakers, and definitely also as regulators, to determine the boundaries. Like we've always said on this program, artificial intelligence is neither evil nor good. Artificial intelligence can be very neutral. What matters is how we use artificial intelligence, the guardrails that we put in place to ensure that artificial intelligence does more good for humanity than evil, right? That's always been our stance on this program, and it remains so. Now, today we are going to be looking at something that we've been alluding to in this program and predecessor programs, and that is the fact that artificial intelligence is not necessarily going to wipe away jobs. We've heard it said a lot that part of the reason why there's a lot of resistance to artificial intelligence implementation in some nations is the threat that artificial intelligence is to take away jobs. And we've said it, that the data actually indicates contrary. The data indicates that artificial intelligence is not going to take away jobs. It's going to take away some jobs, but it's also going to create other jobs. So on a net position, right, when you do the plus and the minus, artificial intelligence is not necessarily going to take away jobs. What is going to happen is that artificial intelligence is going to create a new kind of, a new set of jobs, right? A new range of jobs. And therefore, as nations, what you want to do is to position yourself strategically to avoid structural unemployment. My colleague, Dr. Gushono, who is our economic expert, has been talking a lot about the need to ensure that as nations we avoid what is called structural unemployment. Structural unemployment happens when there's a mismatch between the available jobs and available skills. And this is where planning comes into place. This is where long-term planning comes into place, policy making comes into place, and of course policy implementation as well, right? Nations are supposed to take that long-term position to anticipate the jobs that are likely to be eroded, the jobs that artificial intelligence is likely to take away, and begin to position their people, their labor, for the jobs that artificial intelligence is simultaneously going to create. Now, one thing that the data is already indicating is that what you may want to call blue-collar jobs are likely to emerge based on the immediate need for data centers. We've spoken about that a lot in this program and predecessor programs. There's a huge demand for data centers. Artificial intelligence, like we've said many times and will say again, is getting machines to think like human beings. Now, for machines to think like human beings, they need a lot of high value, high volume, and high velocity data, right? They need to do a lot of processing, and that's where you now get machines to identify patterns. And when they can identify patterns in data, then they can begin to make certain projections, right? That's where you talk about trends analysis, pattern recognitions, and so on and so forth. Now, that takes takes a lot of energy, but it also takes a lot of construction supply, if I can put it that way, right? So we focused a lot on the high end aspect of the work, right? The work of putting together data centers, and that has to do with things like the chips. We've talked about companies like Nvidia now becoming one of the most valued companies in the entire world, right? That's the high end part of it, but there's also the blue collar part of it, right? There's also the need for nations to identify the gaps, if you like, in the blue collar skills, because we are going to have the need for more construction of the data centers, more construction even of the manufacturing centers, maybe for the chips, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that we think nations need to do as they navigate the nuances of artificial intelligence implementation is to identify the gaps, right? They need to work with data, specific data, on the competencies, not the high-end competencies, but the middle-level competencies, so to say, the blue-collar competencies, to look at what they have and to look at what they don't have, and to begin to come up with apprenticeship programs. We believe that this is an area that nations can exploit, right? An area that nations can explore as well. And the reason why we are particular about it is because we think there is likely going to be a level of correlation between some of the jobs that will be lost, right, and the jobs that these blue collar opportunities may create. And I'll give you a quick example. So let's say you go to a particular store where before you will have had a human being clean the store. Now you have a robot, an artificial intelligence powered robot that senses when a human being is near and moves away from the human being. And the artificial intelligence powered robot can also tell when, quote unquote, is programmed to train, to smell the dirt. It's trained to smell the dirt and can clean, right? Bottom line, the artificial intelligence has taken over the job of the cleaner. Now, that's not necessarily a high-end role. It's not necessarily, an electrical engineering role and so on and so forth. It's likely to be the kind of role that can also be peopled by the kind of person that the artificial intelligence data center probably now needs to work at the middle level, at the blue collar level, what's called the blue collar level, which is not necessarily the high-end jobs like. And so we think there's likely going to be a correlation between the jobs that are going to be lost, right, the easily automatable jobs, and thankfully the blue collar jobs that have already been projected as currently being created as a result of the construction going on for data centers around the world. I'll give another example. So previously, maybe you had a cyclist who will get on a motorcycle and will do a food delivery in some cities, right? What you have now is that artificial intelligence is now programmed to do that food delivery, where the walkway is neat and is pliable. You just need to control that artificial intelligence power tool, and then the food delivery happens. So who is quote unquote deprived of a job by that artificial intelligence? Maybe the person who would have been a motorcyclist, who would have been the food deliverer. But guess what? At that kind of level, right, that particular person can also pick up the job that would be created in a data center, middle level role. So we think that there is a significant level of correlation, right? There is likely going to be a significant level of correlation between the highly automatable jobs that are being lost to artificial intelligence and the blue-collar jobs that are thankfully also being created as a result of the construction going on in many cities around the world, or, the data center construction, the high-level data center construction jobs going on. What matters is that nations need to gather this data. These are projections being done by the World Economic Forum, for instance, and different nations now need to drill down the data, test the assumptions, gather the evidence, and begin to create programs. We think that Nations need to be a bit responsive to this, and that's the whole plan of this program, right? That's the whole point of this program. How do nations navigate the nuances of artificial intelligence? They cannot wait for the last minute. They need to get ahead of it. From a policy point of view, nations now need to be doing the first of all, the data gathering. Then based on the data gathering, they need to do the creation of apprenticeship programs. Some programs have to be totally created. Some programs need to be updated, right? They have to look at the skills, the specific skills that are needed for data center constructions. They cannot assume that it was the typical construction skills that it would still require in the very format that it was, initially needed, right? There is some likely going to be some variation, modification, amplification, and so on and so forth. And so they now need to work with the data center creators to say, okay, what are the skills that they are noticing? What are the skills, the skill gaps, beg your pardon, that they are noticing? Not just the skills that they are noticing, but the skill gaps that they are noticing. What are the skills that they are seeing a sufficiency of, and where are the areas where they think there is likely going to be more need around? Now, we are not going to talk about things like curriculum update that we've proposed a number of times on this program and predecessor programs, because we think that's likely to be more around the high-end level. We've talked about the need for policymakers to work as brokers, so to say, between the universities and the industry, between the academia and the industries, to come and to bridge that gap to say, okay, what are the high-end skills? Now, we've addressed that in predecessor programs and also alluded to that a number of times on this particular program, to look at the high-end skills that are needed and to begin to make the necessary curriculum updates, right? For instance, something as simple as economics. There is a need for artificial intelligence economics. That's what we strongly think, even based on the episode we did 2 weeks ago, and we strongly advocated for nations to ensure that they avoid things like an AI bubble, and they guide the public as they continue to invest significantly in artificial intelligence opportunities to manage the risk, to mitigate the risk, while of course taking full advantage of the opportunities. So is there a need for modification of existing programs like economics? We can also go to things like engineering. Is there a need for artificial intelligence engineering? Is there a need for more nuanced, more specific, more tailored, more curated versions of existing programs? Big yes, and we've talked about that. But today we are looking more at like we said, the middle level blue collar jobs, right? Those ones need to be addressed, in our opinion, more by the apprenticeship policies of different nations. We know nations like Germany are generally big on apprenticeship models, but we also know that other nations also have very strong informal apprenticeship sectors, and this is where they may need the government, right, the departments, the ministries to come together with even the informal sector to first of all to document what exists, to articulate what exists, and to also help them to gather the evidence, right? To gather the evidence to strengthen what exists. The bridging, so to say, between the formal apprenticeship sector and the informal apprenticeship sector in some nations is what the public sector, especially the policymakers, need to do from a strategic point of view to ensure that as the automatable jobs begin to get automated by artificial intelligence, the new opportunities being created can be taken full advantage of. This is still your host, Onomodara, here on Amoge Radio Communications. This is your program, Navigating the Nuances of Artificial Implementation in Nations, and today we are looking especially at preparing for the opportunities, the blue-collar opportunities that are rising as a result of data centers construction, the continuous and massive data center constructions that's happening across several nations. How do we ensure that we take advantage of the job opportunities that these data centers creation is leading to, even as artificial intelligence is taking away some jobs? Thankfully, the data centers construction is simultaneously creating other opportunities, but nations need to do their need to be ahead, need to play their part to ensure that there is proactive preparation for optimizing these opportunities. We'll take a quick break now and we'll be back shortly. Thank you.
At Armor Gates Training, we believe professional development should do more than inform. It should transform how people work, lead, and deliver results. That's why we support organizations through conceptual insight, practical learning, and performance evaluation right at the intersection of leadership, strategy, and institutional transformation. Our approach focuses on practical learning format that professionals can immediately apply in their workplace. At Armor Gate, we don't teach theory alone. We equip participants with real-world insight drawn from almost 2 decades of organizational transformation experience. Our programs combine multiple learning methods designed for real-time measurable results. Through seminars, we facilitate deep conversation on key subjects. Using group exercises, participants collaborate, reflect, and think strategically. With case studies, they then sharpened analytical and decision-making skills using real industry scenarios. Through relevant videos, we spark insightful discussions using relatable real-life context. All in all, every participant develops an individual work plan, ensuring the learning turns into real action after the program. Our training programs are hosted in world-class venues across global cities, including Addis Ababa, Nairobi, Mombasa, Cape Town, Dubai, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, London, Florida, and Washington, D.C. Let's work with you to turn learning into your organization's growth. For more inquiries, call +234 807 9574 151 or WhatsApp +1 610 504 6026. Visit www.thearmorgate.org. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Armorgate. Armorgate Training, transforming knowledge, interaction, and growth.
Hello and welcome back to your program, Navigating Nuances of Artificial Intelligence Implementation in Nations, here on Aboge Radio Communications. This beautiful Monday, August 24, 2026. I remain your host, Lomodera, thanking you for staying with us. So, as we've been saying on this particular episode, yes, artificial intelligence is taking away some jobs. It's taking away some jobs at the lower level, as it is at the higher level, and it's also taking away some jobs at the mid-level. But guess what? It's also creating some jobs, and those jobs that it's creating have to be intentionally prepared for, so that nations can take full advantage of that opportunity to ensure that they avoid structural unemployment, which, as we've said, is a situation where there is a mismatch between the available jobs and the available skills, right? For instance, OpenAI is projecting that it's going to create, I think, about 35,000 jobs. OpenAI is said, to be projected that there'll be about 35,000 construction jobs created, right? That's OpenAI alone. Then data centers, the US data centers alone, it's already been said that in the US alone, data centers will grow from, I think, about $126 billion in 2025 to $276 billion by 2030. I think by 2032, if I'm not wrong. So in the space of about 6 years, the US data centers are expected to more than double, right? So the worth of the US data centers is projected to grow from $126 billion to $276 billion. And the World Economic Forum is projecting that there will be about, I think, about 70 million jobs that will be created by this AI revolution, about 70 million jobs, if I'm not wrong. So obviously, on the net position, the projections show more of an opportunity, right? And clearly, especially in the area of data centers, right, clearly there is a strong opportunity also for those at the middle level bracket. But this is going to be easier to take advantage of when nations can gather the data. Now we could reference the United States data center growth projections. nations who are trying to navigate the nuances of AI implementation must do this data. There is a lot of need for research. We need to be very intentional in nations about funding the research proactively to say what is the projection, what is the worth for data centers, for instance, in our nations. What's the worth in a nation in Europe? What's the worth in a nation in Asia? What's the worth in a nation in Africa, in wherever you may find yourself? It's important to do the projections, gather the evidence, gather the data. What exactly? Look at the trends, right? Do the market analysis, do the market surveys, right? Do the key stakeholder engagement interviews, gather the data, and it is very critical for nations to be able to do those projections to start with, right? Like we said, thankfully the US can say that they are expected to grow their data centers by X amount, right? This is the value by which it's expected to grow. And OpenAI as a company can say, we are projecting that we are going to increase, the number of construction jobs by about 35,000, right? We need to also ensure that the big players from nation to nation, either as single entities or as collaborators, must also work with the research institutions in those nations, and the research institutions must be intentionally funded by the governments, by the policymakers in these nations, right? These things cannot be left to chance. The beginning is always the data gathering. It's very important to work with the key players, the key stakeholders, to gather this data, this empirical data, in very specific terms, to know what it is that we are looking at in terms of the opportunities, right? And then, of course, from there, it's now easier to work it back, right? When you know how much more the data centers are going to grow in your nation, then you can work it back to begin to say, what are the jobs, the number of jobs that are likely to be created, right? And of course, you can also begin to work with your Department of Labor or your Ministries of Labor, wherever you call them, to say, okay, what are those opportunities that we have the skills for currently? Nations definitely need to gather the data in this regard. And where are the gaps? And there's something that is also very critical. We also have to develop apprenticeship programs, right? We have to refine existing apprenticeship programs, like I was saying before the break, but we may also need to completely create new ones, create completely new apprenticeship programs specifically targeted to the artificial intelligence industry and uniquely tailored for the data center construction opportunities. This way, nations will not have to unnecessarily export their job opportunities. We've seen instances in some nations, for instance, where they will build a refinery and as much as 10,000 engineers have to be imported. Now, we think this is extremely unacceptable, right? In a nation where it was prior notice that opportunity was happening, as that was being, facilitated, then as that deal, so to say, was being facilitated, they should simultaneously have been working with the Department of Labor to identify which of those skills they have internally and which of those skills that they can grow, because that didn't happen overnight. That sale didn't happen overnight. So exactly how do you sell a whole refinery and you export as much as 10,000 jobs? That's very, very unacceptable. It happened, right? In order to ensure that this does not happen again, such nations have to position themselves strategically, proactively from a policy point of view, and begin to make the projections, the data center projections, in terms of the job opportunities that are likely to be created at the blue collar level. This is being done, like I said, in a nation like the United States, and other nations need to learn from this, need to take a cue from this, and also begin to do their own projections, right? And based on the needs, begin to create specific artificial intelligence apprenticeship programs for the data center construction. I'll repeat, it's important for those nations to begin to create very, very unique artificial intelligence apprenticeship programs for data center construction, right? Those apprenticeship programs should be tailored towards the blue collar level opportunities. That way, they will be able to take full advantage of artificial intelligence, right? They'll be able to democratize the benefits of artificial intelligence. They will not just suffer the losses that may come as a result of the automation of the automatable jobs, but as a nation, the people will also gain the benefits of the job opportunities that would be created, flowing from the the expansion of the data centers creation. Well, this is still your program, Navigating the Nuances of Artificial Intelligence Implementation in Nations, here on Amoge Radio Communications, and I remain your host, Tolu Omodara. And today we've been looking at how exactly do we, optimize the construction job opportunities that artificial intelligence is bringing, especially with the increase in data center constructions. There's just one more aspect that we're going to look at very quickly, and then we would call it a day for today. So when we talk about data center construction, there's a slight change management element that we also need to factor in. There's been the issue of electricity across nations. There's been a lot of concern about the fact that data center creation has taken away in electricity and is placing more demand on electricity resources, even in developed countries, not to talk of other nations that you may want to classify as developing. However, one of the things that we strongly believe is that we have to begin to understand that innovation is something that usually tends to come from necessity. I don't know if you've heard the expression before. I heard this a lot in my earlier years, that necessity is the mother of invention, right? So one thing that we've been seeing, one thing that we've been monitoring is that there's definitely been exploration of new channels of electricity generation, right? Something even as quote and unquote as improbable as importing electricity from space is being considered as we speak. And we think that part of what nations need to do is to also fund more research on innovative electricity generation. We think that data centers should not necessarily bring a scare if we make this part of the things that we are planning as policymakers. I think that it's time to fund research and to establish research centers specifically tailored for electricity generation and distribution innovation for data center support. I don't think that data centers should be seen as an evil that needs to be avoided, right? And that brings me to the last element that I also want to bring in. That's the change management element. There also needs to be a communication and change management strategy for more or less proposing data centers to communities, right? We had a webinar many years ago, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, on Amogate, where we had the privilege of having a state senator from Pennsylvania, United States, and we also had someone who had been in a number, I think, who had worked with the presidency of President Obama, and we looked at how do we manage the implementation of artificial intelligence. And one of the things that we strongly came away with that day, I remember like yesterday, was that it's important to communicate artificial intelligence to people in a way that they can connect. We must be very careful to have an effective communication and stakeholder engagement strategy for more or less like proposing the benefits of artificial intelligence to people in a manner that shows that we are ready to democratize the benefits. This was about 5 years ago, if I'm not wrong. At least 4 years ago, and I think it was about 5 years ago. Now, the reason I'm referencing this is because the need is only stronger, right? Now we only see the need more strongly. Now we find in many communities, number of societies where people come together to more or less like protest against the establishment of data centers around them, because they've seen what is done to electricity demand, and sometimes driven up the cost of electricity. I think in Pennsylvania recently, for instance, Governor Josh Shapiro had to take a stand against data center construction. And currently in the United States, where we're having midterms elections, it has become a political issue right now. And the more you tend to more or less take a stand against data centers construction, probably the more the people are likely to accept you. Now, I'm not going to the politics of it. I'm going to the sustainability of it. I think that what is going to be sustainable is to create alternatives. One of the things that is going to be sustainable, I'm not saying that's the only thing that is going to be sustainable, but I think one of the things that is going to be sustainable is to create alternative electricity generation channels. I think it's going to be very important to fund this research, to begin to test the hypothesis, to begin to do the experimentation, to begin to do the pilots, and if necessary, scale up where appropriate, right? Let's have, that kind of innovation centers that test different ideas at a faster scale, at a faster pace, right? At a higher scale and a faster pace, that test those hypotheses to ensure that as much as possible we can, we don't have to have a situation of either or. We don't have to have either data centers or enough electricity for people. If we get proactive, when I say we, I'm talking policymakers again, if the policymakers get proactive about this, we don't have to choose the data centers or the welfare of the people. We can have both if we go the way of innovation, and that's what we are strongly advocating for, right? Because it's important to have this conversation as part of today's episode, so that we don't present an incomplete picture. If data centers are still feared, if people are still resisting the creation of data centers, if people are still balking against it, then they may not be able to get the job opportunities that will come as these data centers are being created. The construction job opportunities, for instance, that are being projected may not be may not materialize, may not come to fruition if people are still resisting the creation of data centers in their backyards because of the fear of what it will do to electricity demand, right, or to the cost of electricity. So innovation definitely is something that nations need to get ahead of. They have to take it proactively, and they need to fund the research more intensely, more aggressively, right? They need to test the hypothesis, they need to do more pilots, and they definitely need to scale up where the evidence suggests that they can proceed with the testing of or with the expansion of the pilots. We cannot leave this to chance. Artificial intelligence is a moving train, and we need to make sure that we remain in the driver's seat. Wow. I think this is where we are going to call it a day on today's edition of the program. We've thoroughly enjoyed doing this with you as always. I remain your host, Olomodara, and this remains your program, navigating the nuances of artificial intelligence implementation in nations. Today we have been looking specifically at the job opportunities, the blue-collar job opportunities that can come with data center creations, and how to ensure that we, mitigate the risks that can also accompany these opportunities, right, or that can even hinder the fruition or the manifestation of these opportunities, especially when it comes to things like electricity consumption by data centers. Well, we'll be back same time, same station next week by God's grace. Until then, remember we have other programs from Tuesday through Friday on Amoge Radio Communications. We love doing this with you. You are the reason why we do this, and so we look forward to hearing back from you. Please send us a message, send us a mail, send us your feedback, contact@theamoge.org, and you can also reach us through our contact form on www.theamoge.org, or reach us on any of our on our pages, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. We can't wait to hear from you. We hope that you would work with us or reach out to us. We would definitely want to partner with you to implement some of these solutions and even drive some of this research propositions. Thank you so much again for doing this with us. Until I see you same time, same station next week, remember, think innovation and also think proactive policy making for full artificial intelligence optimization. Thank you so much, and see you next week. Have a good one.